Hey, good morning. You know, if you can't preach a good sermon after that, something's wrong with the preacher. I'm just telling you. So get ready, because, it's going to be like Wild Stallion's going to try to hold me back here. But before we start, I just want to welcome our newest members, Kathleen and Stephen Scranton. They're sitting right back there. Their hands are waved. So we welcome them. They've been worshiping with us for a few months now. And one of the things that, in talking with her about membership and him, they said they wanted to just let everyone know that they just love it here at the Cove, but they also are placing their membership to encourage other people who need to do that. And I had mentioned that first service, and a couple, Beth and Rick Gould, who had been here for 6 years, came forward and said, it's about time we place our membership. I'm like, you guys aren't members yet? So they did that. So, thank you for stepping out in that way. Thanks to Elliot and his crew for stepping up and substituting for Ron, who's been out sick ever since he got back from camp. He and his family have been struggling with bronchitis and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But we hope that they will be back and are planning for them to be back this next Sunday. So the praise team and Elliot's done a bang-up job. Amen, that's true. In this particular series, we're looking at characteristics of God's heart as revealed through Jesus' heart as he's interacting with hurting people. We know that God's heart accepts, that God's heart touches, that God's heart marvels, that his heart cares, and that his heart confronts. And today is one of my personal emotional favorites as we see Jesus demonstrating a heart that reaches out. In John chapter 4, Jesus shared with the Samaritan woman an amazing statement about worshipers, true worshipers that God is looking for. God is looking for true worshipers who worship in spirit and in truth. And it's arguably one of the most amazing statements that Jesus ever made. And it begs the question, what is it? What is it that makes someone a true worshiper? Is it a style of music? Is it appropriate dress and attire? Is it rituals? Is it religious heritage? Is it denominational affiliation? Is it biblical knowledge? Is it a Bible translation? Like you have to have the King James Version Bible or else you're going to hell and you're a heathen. The answer to all that is no. That those things do not make you a true worshiper. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but I guess another question is, who is God? And what makes him worthy of such attention of true worshipers? And to that end, Jesus came to the world. He came to the world seeking men and women to grow them into true worshipers. He came to his own, and largely speaking, he was rejected. Many of his followers turned back. When Jesus entered into this phase of teaching deeper and going deeper onto harder lessons, many people just walked away. The disciples, at times, they failed to grasp his calling. The religious leaders, oftentimes, even though Jesus reached out to them, they rejected him. And even his closest disciples, like Simon Peter, demonstrated cluelessness sometimes and failed to understand the heart of worship. And so upon such failure of those that were following him to understand that, Jesus took a radical step. He left Galilee and went northwest to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre was a 35-mile journey from Capernaum, which was Jesus' northern headquarters, and Sidon was a 50-mile walk. So to get to this region would have taken Jesus and his men 2 or 3 days to get there. Now let me ask you a question. How does it feel when you're talking to someone and they're ignoring you? And you can tell they're ignoring you because their mind is somewhere totally else. And so they're just adrift. That doesn't feel good. How does it feel when what you're talking about is something of grave importance to you, maybe the most important thing that you have to share in your life, and they've checked out? When you talk to God, when you pray, does it feel like sometimes he's ignoring you? He's not. That's what Satan wants us to believe, but sometimes that doesn't feel so good. In Matthew chapter 15, A Gentile woman comes to Jesus with the most important request of her life. Her concern for her little girl. Verse 22. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David." That phrase, Son of David, is a messianic title. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Tyre and Sidon were twin cities off the coast of the seashore of the Mediterranean. And in the Old Testament era, this territory was occupied by Canaanites. And that is how this mother is described in the text. She's described ethnically. Now, in this general area of Tyre and Sidon was where Jezebel came from. We've talked about her before. No one names even a dog Jezebel anymore because she was just a nasty woman. And she enters a marriage with King Ahab, and she brings Baal worship with her from this particular region. And she ends up leading all the northern kingdom of Israel astray. Later on, that region was occupied and conquered by Alexander the Great, who brought that Greek influence and philosophy and thinking in all those gods. This area was typically and still was heavily under the Greek influence when Jesus came to that area in the first century. And in addition to that, the Syrophoenicians, they had historically worshiped a goddess named Ashtoreth ever since the days of Elijah. Now, the goddess of Ashtoreth, named Ashtoreth, she was the goddess of beauty. False god, but still they worshiped her. And people worshiped her through the absolute pursuit of pleasure. You can extrapolate that out as far as you want to, and it's included, okay? It is not excluded. The whole Epicurean lifestyle and all that was brought with it was a part of that worship. And as Jesus' popularity was growing, people from that region would come to Galilee to seek Jesus' help and for rescue. So we ask ourselves, why would this woman in this region come and seek out Jesus? It's because she's probably heard the stories. She's probably heard about Jesus' power to work miracles, to give sight to the blind, to remove leprosy, to heal demon possession, which is what her daughter was suffering from. And so now, agonizing and anguished over demon possession of her daughter, she comes to Jesus and she bears her soul to him. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." Verse 23, Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." When Matthew says she began crying out, it's a word that he uses that's continuous action. She didn't just cry out once. She continued crying out again and again and again, over and over and over again. Now, Jesus and his men have entered pagan territory, and now they are kind of unnerved. Put yourself in their situation. You've been in that situation before where there's sounds and chaos that unnerves you. And then you've got this rather embarrassing woman following you at the top of her voice, yelling after you, and the disciples were a little unnerved by it all. Her cry, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy," is an acknowledgement of a person's total and absolute dependence on someone else. She was asking the Lord to do for her what she couldn't do for herself. She was asking the Lord to do something that she didn't even deserve, and she knew she didn't deserve it. It's a cry of desperation from a desperate mom to Jesus for mercy. Now, this Gentile woman was already convinced about the chapter before what Peter said, "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." She wasn't present for that acknowledgement, for that confession, but she knows that Jesus is the Messiah because she proclaims him to be the Son of David, which is that messianic title that the Messiah was going to have. And she says, "Lord, have mercy on me." Isn't that an interesting phrase? Isn't that an interesting way of saying that? It's her daughter that's been demon-possessed, but it's this mom who feels it, who feels the weight, that feels the burden, that feels the despair and the loneliness and the hopelessness and the anguish that is caused by this condition of her little girl. And I've said this several times in this series and will continue to say it. No parent, no grandparent can see their child or grandchild suffer and not enter into that suffering with them. It's just a part of our nature. And this mom is right there. She is desperate for Jesus. Now, it's not surprising what this mom does. This mom just bears her soul. Lord, Son of David, help me. Have mercy on me. That's not what's shocking. What's shocking is Jesus' reaction, or better yet, his lack of response. Now, back in the 80s, it was all about WWJD, wasn't it? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? WD, hats, bracelets, what would Jesus do? Now, there's not a single person in this room or watching online that would have said Jesus was going to ignore this woman. And so what would Jesus do? You can't always tell. You don't always know. Because Jesus pulled a surprise on this one. Clearly, this is not what we come to expect of Jesus-like behavior. It's almost like Jesus is on vacation somewhere and Peter's in control. That's what it's like. And to add to her pain, not only does Jesus seem to ignore her pleas, now the disciples counterattack. They're begging Jesus to send her away and to send that embarrassing loud cry that she's got with her. And just as she's been unceasingly crying out to Jesus for his help, now the disciples are crying out for Jesus to refuse to help her. And the scene is one of verbal turbulence. You got the woman and the disciples, they're all crying out. Jesus, somber as a statue, is silently standing there in the eye of the storm. It doesn't feel very good when you're put on hold, does it? When someone gives you the hand, not the finger, the hand, okay? I was very clear. I said it very clear. When they give you the hand, just I don't want to hear it. I'm busy. Come back later. It's not much fun. And this woman is put on hold by Jesus. But it's a good news, bad news kind of a situation. The bad news is Jesus hasn't said yes. The good news is he hasn't said no. And even more disturbing than Jesus' silence is when Jesus breaks his silence. Verse 24. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Wow. Did Jesus actually tell this woman that he wouldn't help her because she's the wrong ethnicity? That really doesn't sound like Jesus. And you talk about cancel culture. I mean, if it was around in the first century, they would have tried to cancel Jesus. They've been trying to cancel Jesus since the first century, and it's not going to happen. You're not going to cancel my Jesus. Amen? And so he responds with ethnicity. The cheering you hear in the background, way back there in the first century, are the disciples. They're all excited because they think that he's rejected her, and they can just move on about their day. But that's not exactly what's happening. Some might speculate that Jesus helped Jairus with his dying daughter. In fact, when Jesus got there, she was dead. Maybe Jesus helped him because he was an observant Jew, but he refuses to help this woman because she's a pagan. But that doesn't really stand up against our earlier conversation that we had when Jesus helped the Roman centurion, who was also a Gentile pagan. Perhaps there was a look on Jesus' face. Don't you just hate having to wear a mask because you can't see the expression on people's... I mean, I get it. I'm not saying don't wear a mask. That's not what I'm saying either. But you can't see facial expressions. Are they smiling or are they, and so you got to look at the eyes, But maybe there was a look on Jesus' face. Maybe there was a tone in his voice. You know the tone. You can say I love you several different ways. Some of them not so good. It would seem like something is inviting her in. Because rather than walking away in despair, she moves forward. She presses the issue forward. Verse 25. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. Now, those three words can get me really emotionally charged. Lord, help me. Help me. When you really think about those three words, you could easily be moved as well. Lord, help me. Help me. She's desperate. Susie said she's a mama bear, and she's not going to let go. No, she is not going to let go. Lord, help me. You are the only hope that there is. I can't go anywhere else. I've gone other places. No one is available. Lord, if you don't help me, my help is going to come from nowhere else. Lord, help me. You know, one of the most powerful questions you can ask in this life, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whether it's at school, whether it's in the community, at your career, one of the most powerful questions you can ask is simply this: will you help me? Think about that. Will you help me? When Matthew tells us that she began to move and kneel at Jesus' feet, it's a picture of worship. This woman who seemed to be ignored, seemed to be rejected, seemed to be insulted, and still she comes forward and offers him worship. We think surely now, what would Jesus do? Surely now he's going to give her what she wants. But Jesus continues to surprise. This woman could have easily turned her back and walk away. She's placed in Jesus in the waiting room. She's pleaded with Jesus, been ignored. She's insulted by the disciples, and Jesus' next response feels even more harsh than what has happened previous. Verse 26. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Man, she's been ignored. She's been rejected. She's been insulted. Now Jesus calls her a dog. That's not good in the 21st century. It wasn't good in the first century. What is going on here? Ancient Jews, by virtue of their distinct place as a covenant people, they had a very low view of everybody else. And Gentiles were outsiders. And that sense of distance from God, that resulted in the Jews referring to the Gentiles as dogs. And even worse, however, this term was generally used as the street dog, okay? The disease-carrying, filth-ridden equivalent in the first century of a rat. Wow, what is going on here? Verse 27. "Yes, it is, Lord," she said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." She refuses to let go. She refuses to let go. I want you to think about her little girl at home and what this mom is being put through, and she will not let go. If something was going on with my granddaughter, oh man, I'm not going to let go. And you know, if someone had bad intentions, oh man, you're going to see a side of me that's probably going to set Christianity aside for about 5 minutes. Then I'll pick it back up and I'll ask forgiveness. But this mom won't go away. Having offered Jesus her heart, having offered Jesus her daughter, having offered Jesus her need and her worship, she now offers him her humble trust. What she had picked up on when Jesus referred to the word dogs was not a negative connotation. He wasn't referring to her as vermin. He used an affectionate term about a household pet, a puppy. It signaled welcome, not rejection. And she jumps at the opportunity. It's as if she says, I gladly accept the crumbs that fall from your table as long as it's your table and in your house. I have no desire to deprive your children of their bread. Just let the crumbs fall from the table and hit my little girl. And I will accept that. I accept your invitation because I trust you and you are the one that can meet my need. That's what she was saying. Verse 28. Oh man, then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. Mom is not even home yet. And she is healed at that moment. Jesus used a Gentile woman to teach his disciples the true nature of faith and the worship that should generate. What was the point? What was the point of pulling her painfully through these emotional knotholes if the eventual outcome was going to be the same anyway? Hear me very clearly. Not everything that happens to you is for you. Not everything that happens to us is for us. How often do we say, why is this happening to me? You want to know something? It may not have anything to do with you whatsoever. Sometimes the things we experience are actually for the benefit of others. What happened to this woman, what happened to this little girl was for the disciples. It was for them. They had so long been locked and loaded in this religious system of do's and don'ts, buying and selling worship activities. They had no frame of reference of what true worship was all about. But they found it in this lady's response. And the appropriate response to a God who reaches out to us, who came in the flesh, is that we would demonstrate that humble faith and that humble worship. Verse 29. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. This was not a random visit. Jesus had come for her and for her daughter. He had walked his men 2 to 3 days to get to this woman. Now he walks them all the way back 2 to 3 days. I wonder what they were talking about. Susie and I were talking about this in between the service. You know, how often do we get irritated? You know, when the Baptists, they get let out before us, you know, and we have to wait for them, you know, at the restaurants. And we get irritated when stuff just doesn't work out and when someone comes to us and has a need and we're busy and we're inconvenienced. The disciples were inconvenienced. And yet we find ourselves right there with them, walking along, asking God to just do something to get rid of them rather than for us to meet the need. So that walk back must have been an incredible teaching opportunity. He walks them back to the Sea of Galilee. Why such a dramatic step? Because Jesus wanted his disciples to encounter a heart of worship, and he reached across geographical boundaries. He reached across ethnic boundaries. He reached across religious boundaries. He reached across cultural and gender boundaries to help her, but to teach them. Clearly, the God who reaches out to us wants us to reach back with a heart that's humble and a heart that's filled with worship. The Father that has reached us through sending his Son, Jesus has reached us by entering into the things that we go through. He is right there. Even though it may feel like he's ignoring us, even though it may feel like he's silent, that is Satan's way of trying to tell us that he doesn't care. But it's just a lie. It's not true. He does care, and he's never left us, and he never will. And our best response, knowing that he's right there with us, is to trust him to handle things for his purpose. So what's our faith step? Well, I'm going to give you 2 today because one's going to happen in the next minute, and then you're going to be done with faith step number 1. So I don't want you to feel ripped off this week, so I'm going to give you 2. The first one is this. We're going to sing a song here in just a minute. I don't want you to care about anybody who's standing around. You might have to look up to get the words, but just let your heart out. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Sitting, standing, raising their hands, kneeling. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just go before God and just let your heart out in spirit and in truth and just worship him. Reach up to him, reach out to him, and just let your heart out. The second one is this. I want you to reach someone with Jesus this week. Man, that really sounds preachery, doesn't it? To reach someone with Jesus? What are you asking us to do? Reach someone with Jesus? I want you to tell someone what Jesus is doing in your life. Isn't Jesus doing amazing things in your life? He's reconciling relationships. He's forgiving us. He's working through our finances. He's working at work. He's working through, the summer times and the activities that we have. And he's providing safety, and he's sheltering us underneath his wing. He's got all this stuff that's going on in our lives. Tell someone about it. Can you imagine what this woman said when she got back home and she opened up the door and her little girl came running towards her and just threw her arms around her? Maybe for the very first time without that demon possession that kept all that love from her. Can you imagine what that was like? Who'd she tell about that? She told everyone about what Jesus did. Everyone. He's worthy of that. Let's pray.